Hey YouTube. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Like to wish everybody a happy 420 and Easter. I once again don't really have any axe to grind today. I think that maybe we could talk about Joseph's eel and some of the other things that are going on in the fish fam. Testing. Hey Cobweb Cavern, welcome to the stream. Can I get a sound check? I'm not sure how many of you watched Joseph's live stream, J.H. Hardin's Aquatics, the other day. He did a live stream on his eel, and I feel for him. Thank you. I feel for him in the sense that that he poignantly feels the pain of his fish suffering, and I think that's an admirable trait. One of the things I like about Joseph, and I'm kind of at a loss. Eels are something that I've not spent a lot of time studying or keeping. And that's one of the things about this hobby, is that there are so many different little areas that you can get into, so many different types of fish, so many different biotypes, that sometimes even experts don't have a clue. You know, maybe offer generalized kinds of steps that can be taken. As fish keepers, we are invariably going to run into a situation where there just really isn't any information out there easily obtainable, or our situation is one that doesn't lend itself to what information there is. Hey Joseph, we were talking about your eel, man. How can you give us an update on how the eel is doing, Elliot? And I've been casting around, Joseph, trying to figure out some way to offer help. Hey Daryl, welcome to the stream. I've been casting around trying to figure out some way to offer you assistance, Joseph. It's just really something that's completely out of my area of expertise. I really don't know. It's eels are something that I've never spent any time keeping, so it's an area that I have no real personal experience with, and I've never seen anything quite like what you're going through, although it may be very common. It's just kind of a rough thing to suddenly have that situation and see it happening and recognize what it could potentially be, and not really be able to offer any real solutions. I thought Rachel did a good job of offering you a chemical solution. I was interested in her take on it, and she pretty quickly came to a conclusion and gave you what she had. I'm not sure my telling you. One of the basic things that we can do as fish keepers whenever we're faced, with something like hole in the head disease or a lot of the maladies that our fish suffer, one of the basic first steps that we can take is to do heavy water changes. I mean, we have to keep an eye on it. We have to watch it closely because sometimes, unless we're doing really thorough checking of our water, hey, Kaler's Aquatics, welcome to the stream. Right now, the main topic that's on my mind here the past few days has been Joseph's eel, Elliot, and its problems that it's suffering with. And so I'm just kind of casting around. It's a perfect example of what we as fish keepers often face, in the sense that we're suddenly dealing with an illness that doesn't fit in any of the paradigms that we have. We recognize certain diseases, we recognize ick, we recognize, your fish start flicking themselves and their bodies against rocks and the substrate. You kind of get a feel for those sorts of things. Hey, Pleco Whisperer, welcome to the stream. You kind of get a feel for those sorts of things, and you recognize what you need to look for, and you have a regime of treatments or methodologies to try to attack the problem. And then every once in a while, you're faced with something that you can't really classify, you can't really guess exactly what it is, and you're just kind of left feeling helpless. And that's a pretty common feeling in this hobby, is to face some sort of malady that your fish are suffering and not really have a clue as to what it is that you really need to do about it. That's when you start doing research. That's when you start talking to people that have experience in the area that you're trying to figure out. I suggested to Joseph that he scour his local universities or try to find a marine biologist that might have some experience in that area and could potentially point him towards someone who might know close at hand, or give him an idea of what he's facing and what to do about it. But there are certain basic attacks that we can use when we are faced with a problem like the one that Joseph's eel is going through. The first line of defense is water changes. If all else seems useless, you can always do heavy water changes, and sometimes just doing those water changes alone will solve a problem. Like hole in the head, there are lots of chemicals that you can use that will, clout is one that comes to mind, but there are things that you can use chemical wise that will help the situation. But one of the things that is most common in hole in the head disease is water quality. So if you can do heavy water changes for a while and really be sure that that tank has pristine water in it, then you will sometimes find that things like hole in the head disease will start clearing themselves up. Hey, Turbofish, welcome to the stream. There are countless diseases and pathogens and maladies that our fish all carry with them at all times. They always have the potential of developing these problems, but usually their own immune systems and their health will help them fight these things off. It's when some kind of stress is added to potentially deteriorating water quality that suddenly these things present themselves as full-blown diseases or maladies, or there's a lot of different ways that fish can get sick. You introducing new fish into the tank that are carrying some disease that fish has never faced before. There's a lot of different ways that fish can go downhill really quickly. And as fish keepers, we have to learn to recognize those things for what they are and begin to act quickly enough to stave off that malady getting to such a degree that we can't do anything to fix it anymore. There's tipping points, and tipping points in fish diseases are when the fish basically succumbs to the disease and is on a downward spiral. And it's really hard sometimes to pull that fish out of that downward spiral. And so we need to be ahead of that downward spiral as fish keepers. We need to recognize through observation that something is going wrong, that our fish is not acting like it normally does, and try to ascertain what it is that's going on in our tank. Get out the water quality test kit, test our tap water and see if something's wrong with it. Test our RO water and see if maybe our membrane has gotten clogged to the point where it's no longer pulling everything out of the water, and that the output of our RO unit is suddenly not doing what it needs to do to keep the water clean enough so that the fish are getting pristine water conditions. There are just, it just fans out. It's not like it's one flow chart and one thing to the next thing to the next thing. It's like all of a sudden we've got this whole potentiality that opens up out from underneath us, and we no longer really know what it is that we need to do to, it can be really overwhelming. It can stupefy you to the point where you just freeze as a fish keeper, that you recognize that your skills are not up to this task. And that's the time when we need to be able to reach out to others in the community, to reach out to sources of information that we trust, to reach out to people in positions of higher learning that might be able to point us towards someone who has an expertise in the field that we are in suddenly. What the field of what kind of disease it is, the field of this special fish or aquatic creature that we're taking care of that suddenly has this problem. It's a lonely and helpless feeling sometimes when something starts killing your fish. And don't for a minute not believe that there are things out there in this hobby, in the the joy of fish keeping, that can wipe out our entire tanks if we're not up to snuff as far as getting ahead of the problem before it takes over and wipes our fish out. Like I said, our fish have natural defenses. Our fish have slime coats that protect them from certain infections or protect them from certain parasites. There are a lot of chemicals that we can have in our arsenal that will cause our fish to slough their slime coat. It all comes off. Hey, G Bear, welcome to the stream. There are things that we can add to the water that will thicken their slime coat. So we have a lot of ways to go about trying to bolster the fish's natural defenses against problems. You know, if the fish is suffering from some kind of internal malady, maybe internal parasites, or maybe some kind of food that we're feeding it that's causing it an issue, it is possible to use Epsom salts so that the digestive tract allows everything to pass really quickly so it doesn't stay blocked up, or so that it can kick out those parasites quickly. There are ways that we can attack a parasitic problem that have to do with the life cycle of those parasites. You will hear, hey, Lumpy Dog, welcome to the stream. You will hear people talking about using salt and high temperatures to treat ick. And what's going on in that situation is the temperature of the water has a great deal to do with how much time the life cycle of ick takes to complete. Ick will go into a free swimming stage, and when it's in that free swimming stage, it needs to reattach itself to a host so that it can continue its life cycle. And by raising the temperature up, you speed up the amount of time that that free swimming stage has to find and attach itself to a host. And so it is less likely to reinfect because it has its life cycle has been sped up so much. Sorry. That it has less time to reinfect, to reattach itself to a host. So there are a myriad ways of attacking a disease problem, and often we can use the disease or the parasite life cycle against it by manipulating things like the osmotic pressure of the water on the fish, by manipulating the temperature of the water, by manipulating the makeup of the water. There are a lot of different ways that we as fish keepers can use to attack diseases. It doesn't always have to be clout or erythromycin or something like that. It is possible to catch a disease, catch a parasite early on in its life cycle or early on in its infection, and do things that aid the fish in fighting off the malady itself. And it's important that we as fish keepers begin to understand how to do those things. Get comfortable with situations that normally make us uncomfortable. You know, Joseph may well lose that eel, but if he uses this experience with that eel as a springboard to develop his ability to recognize and to attack diseases or maladies or parasites early on. If he recognizes it more quickly and has an arsenal to attack that problem that aids the fish's own defense systems, then he may stave off a similar problem again. Now, that's not to say that it won't turn out to be something that is that can't be fixed. There are a lot of things in this hobby. Mycobacterium. There are a lot of different diseases that are so pernicious in their attack that once they have begun, there's literally no saving them. So we have to be realistic. Hey, Dan Slee, welcome to the stream. Goodness. We have to be realistic in recognizing that that comes hand in hand with this hobby, that we may face things that we can't, that there isn't methodology out there that, silver bullet solves the problem, that it may be developing around us and we just don't know about it. Someone may be doing research that is getting closer and closer to that magic silver bullet. But there are so many different types of species of fish and so many different types of fish within a species that sometimes there are issues, like with the eel, it's scaleless, and scaleless fish have a harder time accepting our medications. They don't often survive the treatment that would normally cure fish. So scaleless fish are an area that is off to itself on the side, and it is more difficult to solve problems with them. Your range of usable medications is less. But I think it's critical that we understand that there are literally ways that have nothing to do with chemicals that we can aid our fish in their natural defenses. And one of those is pristine water. Another one that you can say is a chemical, but doesn't really register as a chemical. Hey, KG Cichlids, welcome to the stream. Salt. Salt is a medication that is pretty natural. So there are different kinds of salts that can be used. There are calcium salts. There are all kinds of different salts that we can use that are a part of nature more than a part of chemical medication. And a lot of these things can be used to help the fish. There's two tracks on treating a disease in fish. One of them is the fish has the disease and it's going to die from it or become really sick and perhaps infect all the other fish in the tank. And so you need to go down a chemical pathway that, in my case, I usually try to start small and work my way into the heavy, big guns of medication. And sometimes that is a completely erroneous. Many times I have said to myself, I wish I had just gone for the erythromycin from the start instead of slowly working my way up, recognizing that it wasn't working at each stage. But it's a balancing act. The other track on fish diseases is the health of the fish's natural defenses against this disease, against this parasite, against this pathogen. And so we can take both tracks at once sometimes. If you're treating the water, then you're probably not going to be able to do massive water changes every day that ensure perfectly pristine water. But most medication treatments have a time schedule on them. You know, you add the medication, you leave it for 3 days, then you do a 20% water change and retreat the medication and leave it another 3 days. Some kind of dosage that has in it, built into it, water changes. So you're doing both things even when you're treating with medication if you're careful to hit all those time stamps on when the water changes need to be done and how much needs to be done. But it is possible to cure a lot of smaller, less pernicious maladies simply by doing heavy, good water changes. And by that I mean if you have a high nitrate level coming out of your tap water and you do massive heavy water changes, you may send the nitrates spiraling out of control simply by doing massive water changes. In that case, you need to be pre-treating, you need to be ROing, you need to be doing something to that tap water to keep that from being a problem. By the same token, if you are overdosing with your dechlor, you know, if you do a 30-gallon water change and you put a whole cap full of prime in there, or a cap full of your dechlor, which is enough for 50 gallons, and you do 10 30-gallon water changes and throw a cap full of 50 gallons worth of treatment in every time you do that water change, then you are building up that dechlor in the water column to a state that can cause your fish to be gasping at the surface for air because you've done water changes with good clean water, but you've overtreated with your dechlor to a point where it's literally binding with the oxygen in your water and causing your fish to gasp for air. So heavy water changes are a good thing as long as you're sure that the water you're using isn't causing a problem and that your dechlor treatment is not being overdosed to the point where that's causing a problem. You know, everything's a balancing act in this hobby. We have to balance both sides of the equation or something's going to get out of whack. And you've got to keep that in mind when you're dealing with a disease or pathogen or parasite in your fish as well. You can't suddenly go way overboard in one direction and forget about this other part over here. You've got to maintain both things at once. And sometimes that's a very difficult balancing act to maintain, allowing the fish's own natural defenses to defend it against the issue, or allowing your fish's state of well-being to aid it in defeating or fending off a problem. You know, and you may be aiding it by adding Epsom salts, you may be aiding it by adding a little bit of salt to the aquarium, which changes the osmotic processes that are going on within the fish that allow it to breathe easier, allow it to maybe pass problems out easier so that it's not stressing out from its natural osmotic process, and that you are giving it a little bit of aid in helping it to defend off its own problem. And we just have to be aware that not always is a disease something, or a malady something that we've introduced into the aquarium, that very often the disease comes from something that the fish has been carrying with it as long as it's been alive. It's like people say, how does bacteria get into my fish tank when I first set it up? How does the bacteria get in that tank? Bacteria is everywhere. Bacteria is on every surface. Bacteria is in every breath of air there is. And it just needs a medium to function on, to get a colony started where it is actually going strong. So it's not like we have to add bacteria to a tank when it first starts. Bacteria is in the air and it is going to get in the water. By the same token, our fish are carrying a whole codex of diseases and maladies and issues inside of them already. And when something stresses them above the normal amount of stress that they're accustomed to, in the sense of suddenly there's an issue with the water, a fish dies in the tank, and suddenly the water quality deteriorates. Hey, Shelly G, welcome to the stream. Suddenly the fish is no longer healthy enough, or suddenly the fish is stressed out more than normal to the point that it becomes susceptible to all this myriad of diseases and pathogens that it's been carrying around with it its whole life. It's just like us. If we get stressed out, if we get in a bad way, if we're suffering depression, if our lifestyle has suddenly had a huge change in it, we will suddenly start to experience colds and flus and things that normally our body would fight off. Hey, Shelly G, welcome to the stream. I'm glad you made it too. We suffer the same way as our fish do when our health is suddenly stressed and our normal healthy state has degraded. Suddenly all these pathogens that we're carrying with us for our whole lifetime can take over, can have a chance to affect us. And it's the same thing with our fish. Our fish normally in the wild face all kinds of different parasites, infections, pathogens. Right, it does have to do with our immune system and the fish's immune system. And what I'm trying to get at is that there are certain ways that we can aid our fish's immune system. And an immune system operates by being exposed to one of these pathogens or diseases or parasites, and then developing an immunoresponse to that, which naturally fights it off, that pushes it back in a corner, that encapsulates it with some kind of bodily membrane that stops it from affecting the host. So our fish have to have been exposed to whatever is attacking them before. And there are a lot of times when our fish haven't been exposed to certain things. If you order in wild caught fish that come from highly acidic waters, and suddenly you start keeping them in neutral or 7.5, 7.8, if you start keeping them in pHs that are higher than acidic, there are a whole new class of diseases and pathogens and parasites that can exist in that water, that can survive in that water, that couldn't survive in that acidic water. And so they were never exposed to that in their natural environment. So they have no immuno response built up to those things that can suddenly survive in a pH of 7 to whatever you suddenly put that fish in, higher than 7 or 7. They have no ability to fend those things off. And if they get attacked by several of them at once, we end up with dead angelfish, or we end up with dead discus fish, because they have no immuno response system built up to handle those things. Suddenly they're dealing with the stress of a much higher pH. The water's no longer acidic. And then on top of that, they have to face all these new diseases and pathogens that they've never experienced in their life in the wild in acidic water. So all of this information, and while it may not be pertinent to Joseph's eel, right now, all of this is the kind of information that we need to have on hand so that we can begin to understand the whole picture of what this disease that we're suddenly faced with that we have no clue about represents. What is it? What has happened that is causing this to happen, so that I can make sure that I don't ever see it again, because I will do what's required to see to it that my fish don't ever face this again. That's not to say that we're going to be perfectly 100% at doing that. We all have times where our water quality slips. We have lives to live. We have families to take care of. Sometimes things are just going to happen, even though we know not to let those things happen. But if we have a better understanding of what's happened and how to prevent it from happening again, and how to proceed down the path towards figuring out the solution to this problem, if we've talked to other people and they've expressed this problem to us before and how they arrived at a solution, other fish keepers that keep the same kind of fish that we keep, or that don't keep the same kind of fish that we keep. Sometimes methodologies can transfer from species to species to species. Some things are effective across the board. And heavy water changes and raising the quality of the water is one of the things that is effective across the board. So anytime I'm faced with a situation where I'm suddenly experiencing fish loss and don't really have a handle on what it is that's going on, I just know that the first thing I need to do is make sure that that water quality is good, or as good as I can make it. And it's very often heavy water changes that will allow us to proceed to see if that starts the process going the other way again, if the fish's natural defenses are still strong enough, and if I've caught this problem early enough. Sometimes we don't catch it. Sometimes we're too busy. Sometimes we haven't, we got too many tanks and we can't spend enough time observing each tank to really catch the very early signs of an issue. But as fish keepers, we should try. We should make an extra effort to understand our fish through observation so that anytime something is off, anytime something has changed suddenly, we see a behavior that we've never seen before. It may be that that fish has gone into breeding, that it's suddenly ready to breed, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad change. Hey Laura, welcome to the stream. I'm ranting on about the issue that Joseph is having with his eel, Elliot, and he never gave us an update, so I don't know whether that's good or bad or whether he's just busy and didn't have time to stick around. It's just dealing with a fish disease, dealing with sudden fish loss, dealing with an issue where you can see clearly that that fish is going downhill quickly and that you, in the back of your mind, are thinking, I'm going to lose this fish unless something happens quickly in its favor. We need to have an arsenal already in our minds about the kinds of things that we can do that will help that fish fight off the problem itself. Sometimes it's not going to matter. Sometimes the disease has progressed far enough along. Sometimes the parasite has won the battle already. Sometimes the pathogen has already killed our fish. It's just still swimming around in the tank. But if we can take early, quick steps by recognizing the issue early and by having an arsenal of ways in which we can proceed, heavy water changes. That doesn't work, a salt treatment. If that doesn't work, something to cause the fish to slough off their slime coat and restart their slime coat. A lot of these things are ways in which we can aid the fish that's experiencing a problem. Adding Epsom salts to the water. Now, I wouldn't add Epsom salts and aquarium salt at the same time. Some people might tell you differently, but if I'm going to treat with Epsom salt, I do it without adding other salts to the aquarium. And I'm always ready to do another quick water change to get that Epsom salt out if it looks like it's causing the issue to become worse instead of better. And oftentimes you will need to treat with Epsom salts in tandem with some kind of anti-parasitic medicine, because that fish is suddenly going to be able to expel those parasites much easier. The parasites are going to have a harder time grabbing a hold inside the fish because everything's going to be much more slippery or less easy to get a hold of, and Epsom salt will cause those parasites to pass out into the water, and they are going to want to reinfect as quickly as possible, or they're going to go into their cyst stage or whatever their life cycle is. You can study those life cycles and begin to know ways to attack them. And so oftentimes you will use Epsom salts in tandem with a heavy parasitic medicine that will treat the fish and the water, and the water will be highly unhealthy for the parasite to exist in, and you may kill it off to a point where it's no longer a deadly issue in your tank. You may save your fish before the parasites reduce its health to a point where it no longer can keep itself going. It's it's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly what's affecting your fish. There are often times when you will be faced with a situation that looks like two or three different things and turns out to be something entirely different. Um, there's all these bugaboos out there, microbacterium and heavy duty parasites and columnaris and all these bad words out there in the hobby that it could be. And in the back of your mind, if you're treating something and it's not helping, then you keep reaching towards those possibilities. Your mind will run to them and say, "Oh my God, am I dealing with a microbacterium infection that's going to wipe out my whole tank? Am I dealing with a columnaris infection that's going to wipe out my whole tank?" It's hard not to go down those rabbit holes, but as we progress as fish keepers, as we go through these issues, even if we don't figure out immediately what it was that killed our fish, at some point in the future, if we are doing research on one topic and suddenly we recognize something that occurred during that disease outbreak that killed all the fish in a tank, and we recognize something in that, then we will be ready to learn. We will be ready to absorb that information that is now presented to us with our recognition of oh, that was what happened. And when you have that in your head and you are suddenly presented with new information that goes right down that same pathway, then you are much more likely to read what that solution that those people or that this text has in it and plug it back into your knowledge base as what to do if you are faced with that situation. There's all kinds of things like that in this hobby. There's all kinds of homeopathic things. There's all kinds of weird little quirks in science. There's all kinds of, like just the basic knowledge that if you're suddenly faced with a power outage and your fish are gasping at the surface of a tank and you have no way to get air pumped back in there, that if you can make a jar with a piece of air tubing sticking in the top of it and dice up a potato and put that raw potato in that jar and then fill that jar half full with hydrogen peroxide, the output is pure oxygen. And so you can create your own air supply, oxygen, to put back into the water. Now, it's not going to have a lot of head pressure in it, so you're not going to be able to put the air stone very deep in the tank. But for a short period of time, that jar full of potatoes and hydrogen peroxide will create enough oxygen and enough pressure to run an air stone, not very deep, but slightly deep into your tank. And you can suddenly produce oxygen. That's not something that you're going to use every minute. That's not something you're going to do on a regular basis. But if you've got that little kernel of knowledge in your arsenal and you are suddenly faced with a power outage, and oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't get air any way at all. If you know that and you have a bottle of hydrogen peroxide and a couple of raw potatoes, you've got the ability to keep those fish alive until maybe the power comes back on again. And if you have to let it run for a couple of hours or however long it lasts, and then dump it all out and do it again, you can go a longer period of time, and you'll be able to watch your fish in the tank. They'll settle back down into the water when there's enough oxygen in the water for them to be able to breathe comfortably. Now, it's not going to save your bacteria in your tank, but it's going to give you a fighting shot at making it to such a point where when you can begin to recover. And it's the same thing with diseases. If you can give that fish a fighting chance to fight off that disease itself with some little homeopathic trick that you've learned, then you might get that fish through that problem. Laura asks, so I was doing some tidying up the other day, and at the back of the cupboard I found some Soylent Green Repashy that went out of date in 2017, and some algae wafers that went out of date at the start of the year. What would you do, throw away, or use? Well, Laura, Repashy is a wonderful thing, and if it was me, and I've probably got a bottle of out-of-date Repashy myself, if it was me, I would try to bolster that Repashy with some food that I know is not out of date. I would mix it like I normally would, and then I would either add some Repashy in there that I know is not out of date, or maybe grind up some flake food and add it to it, or maybe grind up some wafers or pellets. Yeah, waste not, want not. That's for sure. Expiration dates are a seller's way to ensure that no one sues them for something being out of date and having caused a problem. So they put an expiration date on it. But most of those expiration dates are pretty conservative. You know, it's like an expiration date on medicine. The medicine is degrading. There's no two ways about it. It is degrading, but it doesn't mean that it's totally useless. And since there's nothing in Repashy that's going to hurt your fish, you know, they may turn their nose up at it. You may mix it up and put it in the tank, and it may not smell like anything to them anymore, and they may not eat it. But if they've been eating Repashy all along, they're going to recognize that it is still Repashy, and they may eat it anyway. And the benefit they get out of it may not be as good as the benefit they would have gotten before it went out of date. Some of the natural oils and stuff like that may have broken down to the point. I mean, you know, a lot of times is AVB23, welcome to the stream. A lot of times you can tell if a product has gone rancid, and if something's gone rancid, then don't use it. If you can open up and smell it and it smells really bad, then don't use it. Or if it's 20 years out of date, chances are you probably shouldn't use it. But if it's close, it's just reducing the amount of benefit that that product would have normally given if it had been used within date. Laura says, I haven't tried the Repashy yet, but I chucked one of the algae wafers in yesterday, and they went for that. So I'd say it's okay, no deaths yet. Yeah, it's not likely to kill your fish. Unless you can smell it being really rancid, I'd say that it's probably not going to be a problem as long as it's close. If it's 5 years out of date or 10 years out of date, then yeah, I'd pitch it. But if it's just a year out of date or less than a year out of date, then I'd use it just like normal. And that may be much less so when dealing with medications, because medications really are going to break down. VB, I always thought the same thing about Repashy, that it was too expensive. And then I started using it and began to realize just how effective a food it was. Well, sometimes algae wafers are not tuned towards plecos diets. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you can get pleco diets, but even the term pleco, or here lately I've been hearing lots of people say pleco. That is completely alien sounding to my ear, but if pleco is the proper pronunciation, then I guess maybe I ought to start using it. They probably eat worse in nature. Yeah, that's probably true. They probably eat worse in nature. But they eat what they know will satisfy them and what they need in nature. So if you're using an algae wafer that has almost no meat in it of any kind, and you're trying to feed them to certain plecos, they're going to starve to death eating those algae wafers because there's not enough meat. A lot of plecos are carnivores. They eat meat in nature. Now they will graze yeah, Laura. All right, guys, we're headed towards the top of the hour once again. I've survived another hour on live stream. I have yet to get another. I've got some video material that I've worked up, but I'm having a great deal of trouble using my new program that I'm using. All of this stuff is a learning curve, and I'm not really happy with the footage that I ended up getting. So I'm probably going to reshoot it all and retry to do it. So I am working on video material. It's just I haven't gotten it done yet. I'm just doing live stream after live stream after live stream. I apologize to subscribers that are tired of me just doing live streams, but I promise to try to get about putting out more video content. All right, you guys. Have a lovely holiday weekend, whether you're celebrating 420 or Easter or both, and just enjoy your weekends. Okay, Laura, I've been working on it. I just haven't gotten everything together. All right, guys, I'm out. Good luck with your fish.